you put yourself down
Yeah.
because you're having to earn in every interaction with everybody. Like I imagine that probably went on for some time. How did that feel in your interactions with people?
I didn't notice in the moment a bit of a narrative that I had to serve. I had to be of help to others. And then kind of comes from that 12-step community. Addiction is a part of my journey as well, where it's that giving back piece. And so in the moment, I would think, oh, I'm doing well. And I thought this was the right path. And you just got to stick with it and persevere. And it also got me to a spot where I started to think about killing myself, not because of what I'd done, but just I would never be okay out here. I would never be okay in society. I'd never fit in. Living in a lot of fear, a lot of worthlessness. Even though the content of my life at that time, I really was doing everything I could to be a good citizen again, to earn that second opportunity, working, volunteering, good member of my community, re-engaged with family and friends. The external was always really good. And that's always been my struggle, is I can get the external going very well, but that I'm not good enough narrative can really destroy the insides.
This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Midlife Transition Mastery. If you have reached midlife and you are successful, you have checked all the boxes, you've done everything you thought you should do, and especially pleasing everybody else, doing what you think everyone else needs you to do, but you still feel like something's missing, like you're coming up empty, feeling alone, feeling misguided or lost. Midlife Transition Mastery Explorer community is for you. Here we will build authentic community. We will learn about the 8 steps to mastering midlife transition, and we will learn and execute living life with no regrets in our second half. Please check out the community on lifeintransition.online/MLTM, Midlife Transition Mastery. And I look forward to seeing you around the fire in this community. I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition, a podcast about making the most of the changes we're given. As a married father of 3 teenagers, a longtime global business executive and adventurer, I've been through hundreds of transitions in my life. Many have been difficult, but all have led to a depth and richness I could never have imagined. You'll get to hear all about them on this podcast so that together, we can create more love and joy in our lives, no matter what transitions we are going through. Welcome back to Life in Transition podcast. I'm really excited today to have with us Andy Evans. And Andy's connected to me by Vince Fowler, who I've had a lot of interactions with lately and really grateful for. A really good guy. Andy is a coach, facilitator, human being, and endurance athlete, and has been through some very interesting sessions in life. So Andy, most welcome to Life in Transition podcast. Very excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here, Art. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So what would you consider, Andy, to be the most meaningful transition that you've been through in your life?
It's a bit difficult to kind of really parse out one little simple piece, so I'll try my best here. It's really letting go of the external narratives around a really difficult experience in my life. So as we've talked kind of previously in the prep, I'd taken a life quite a few years ago, went through the whole judicial process, can turn myself in, prison, all that. But it was really the struggle coming out of, how do I let go of always feeling like I have that sign on my chest? And that was an issue I'd always had even before this moment, was just really allowing those external narratives or those kind of labels really define me and really keep me locked into how I behave and how I viewed myself in the world and in relationships. So the big transition is really, how did I letting go of those and just operating from a place of comfort and personal love.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, congratulations on getting there, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really wonderful. Something everybody strives for. Questions coming up for me is, what were the things on the sign? Even before, you said I always had a sign on my chest and there was things on that sign. Yeah. And then after I took a life and was coming out of that judicial system, there was other things on the sign. What were the things that were on your sign? I think everybody has a sign.
Yeah. Definitely not good enough. And even coming out of prison, it was finally something to hang my hat on. I've truly proved I'm not good enough in a weird sense.
So the general tag, the general category was, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Which everybody has in some degree or another.
Yes.
And then coming out of prison, you put something else on it that was just a specification, making it specific of how you're not good enough.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Like I remember as young as, let's say about 8, like bringing home a report card, the 1B+. And that
Mhm.
was the thing that my head focused on and that I heard from my parents, like what happened here. And all I heard at that moment was you didn't do good enough. That's you have to have A plus across the board. So I can look back as far back as then and really see that and really see how that drove that internal narrative and just how I interacted with everyone and how I felt, which as we know does impact a lot of behavior and choices and those types of items. So that was that sign from as early as I can remember. It was just always that feeling I have to prove or do better. Love was earned,
Mm.
acceptance was earned. People wanting me around was tied to my value to them. So it just always kind of keeps coming back to that. Like even though the phrase on the sign on my chest might change, the underlying aspect of it was always you're just not good enough.
As you are, you're not good enough. You have to do
Yeah.
something to earn fill in the blank.
Yes.
Worthiness, praise, love, connection, acceptance,
Yes.
whatever it is. Yeah. And I think in my experience, and I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of people, of course, I don't know everybody. Everybody has that, right? We
Mhm.
learn it at a very young age that we're not getting our needs met. We need to adjust ourselves somehow
Right.
because that's the only thing that we can adjust. And that sort of creates this inner heart of shame of some kind or another from a
Yeah.
very early age for everybody, no matter how wonderful their parents were or their
Mhm.
caregivers were. But very interesting. So that's how it was articulated. Your words, your sign was, I'm not good enough. And then I finally proved it when I went to prison for taking a
Yeah.
life.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then trying to walk around with that of just that magnified belief of I have to be absolutely amazing coming out to
Mm.
even kind of get to the starting line again, to even be worthy of an opportunity, to be worthy of the basic aspects of joy, gratitude, all those types of things. There would be guilt tied to it of like, well, I'm not supposed to feel this because I haven't earned it yet, which became a very difficult journey in those first years. Really sacrificing myself and who I wanted to become, always thinking like, hey, I always have to do the thing that's going to be of such value to everyone else. What does everyone else want from me? Because I felt, oh, I owe. And maybe eventually if I volunteer enough, if I'm on this committee and sitting on this thing and helping here and helping there, like maybe I might be just good enough to deserve this second opportunity.
So what started with, I'm going to put it in quotes here, but what started with a B plus, not being good enough
Mhm.
and having earned that now became, well, I did something that's generally considered in society as the worst thing you can do
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
take another human being's life. And now I really have to double down. I really have to pay the price. I really have to suffer, whatever the words are. What was the dialogue that you had in your mind about that?
At that time, I really felt like I was unlovable, unredeemable, and unworthy. Those were kind of three words that always popped out when I was trying to explain it to others or even just in myself and meditations and writings and readings. Because
Mhm.
that's what really came out was just there was never going to be a position where I was clean, healed, valued, and just kind of at that starting line again. So it really skewed me negatively and just allowed, I never want to say people took advantage, but people would ask and I'd always sacrifice of myself first.
Right. You put yourself down
Yeah.
because you're having to earn in
Yeah.
every interaction with everybody. And how did that feel? Like, I imagine that probably went on for some time. How did
It
that feel in your interactions with people?
I didn't notice in the moment. I had a bit of a narrative that I had to serve. I had to be of help to others, and then kind of comes from that 12-step community. Addiction is a part of my journey as well, where it's that giving back piece. And so in the moment, I would think, oh, I'm doing well, and I thought this was the right path, and you just got to stick with it and persevere, and this is how you get to it. But it also got me to a spot where I started to think about killing myself, not because of what I'd done, but just I would never be okay out here. I would never be
Mm.
okay in society. I'd never fit in just because it was just this pressure and this weight just always kind of crushing on, just felt like I'm never going to be able to mount up. I'm never going to meet this internal narrative I had of how good I have to be to fit in and to have this opportunity again. So it really became debilitating of living in a lot of fear, a lot of worthlessness. Even though the content of my life at that time, I really was doing everything I could to be a good citizen again, to
Right.
to earn that second opportunity, working, volunteering, good member of my community, re-engaged with family and friends. The external was always really good. And that's always been my struggle is I can get the external going very well, but that I'm not good enough narrative can really destroy the insides.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for everyone to hear that actually our external, the content of our life really has, unfortunately, very little bearing on the inner content of our
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
Right. There was a wonderful gentleman here in my community that had everything, made it from rags to riches as a black man in the South in the United States, and
Yeah.
had everything: family, fitness, money, and killed himself a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
Right. So I think that's really important to see. I was having a conversation with my brother on Sunday about feeling down. And he's like, well,
Mhm.
I always look at you and think your life is so perfect. It's sort of wild to think that you can feel down, but there's no connection between sort of the circumstances. There is a connection, but just because the
Mhm.
circumstances look good on the outside doesn't mean that they're good
Yeah.
on the inside.
That really became a turning point actually for me, would have been about 6, 7 years ago now, talking to a lot of men that had great content. They'd gone to school, they'd got a career, they had a family, and they were sad and miserable inside. They're like, I've done everything I'm supposed to. And it was a real eye opener for me of these guys feel the same way I do. It's not like, it's really not about the content. It's that journey and how we process the inside and carrying around all those should narratives we hear from everywhere else.
Yeah. And I think that gets especially cute as we reach midlife. Because often
Mhm.
as we reach midlife, say maybe it's 40 to 60 in there. For everybody, it's a little bit different, right? We have accomplished a lot of the things that we thought we should, that
Mhm.
society tells us are going to make us happy. And yet we don't feel fulfilled. Our inside is still really tough. And we're asking ourselves, well, then what?
Yeah.
Or what's next or how? And that's what was going on for the
Mhm.
guy in the community that killed himself, right? He did
Yeah.
everything perfectly and didn't have the answer for then what. I'm just launching I've done the sort of the beta group for over a year, but I'm just launching publicly this. It's called Mastering Midlife Transition.
Yeah.
And that's what's really about, starting in September 24th. So I get that. I wanted to peel back a little bit into 12 step as well. I'm
Mhm.
also I'm in Workaholics Anonymous, very active with that. But Workaholics Anonymous has a little bit different flavor because they don't emphasize the service. You don't have to earn it, right? There's a lot of
Mhm.
focus on being good enough as you are. I wanted to, because of course service is wonderful, but if you're doing it out of a space of not being okay or trying to earn something,
Mhm.
and then there's a ton of people in 12 steps. So I just wanted to feel like, how did you feel like you had to do service? And maybe that's the whole answer, is the had to, in a way that also wasn't making you feel fulfilled in 12 step.
It's one of my struggles with the 12-step community, especially kind of more of the alcohol, narcotics,
Yeah,
where
very
that's
clean.
my history. There's a very strong hierarchy, especially through sponsorship and old timers. And so things get really drilled at you like you have to. They'll always soften it with the, well, it's suggested. But the narrative that always comes through and the message you hear over and over is like, you have to do this or else you're going to fail. You have to do this or else you're going to relapse. And I'd had some mentors in my life that would often, and try not to kind of get too much into that and throw them on the bus, but the
Right,
narrative would
right.
be, you owe. This was
Mhm,
done for you, you now owe.
mhm.
And so it was kind of really that negative framework of like, this isn't out of goodness and that I truly want to serve. And it's not that I didn't want to help others, but it was always framed of like, this is a debt I have to pay, which was kind of tied into that not good enough again. So it really became an unhealthy perspective of doing it instead of from a place of service, of love, of joy. It became
Yeah.
a have to of,
Which is interesting because if you think about step 4, the first thing you list is your resentments.
yeah.
And if you do anything out of a sense of obligation instead of out of a joy or open heart, then you build resentment,
Mhm.
right? So you're building that back in. So my question, Andy, is how did you go from that point, right, of even when you're in 12-step recovery and coming out of prison, out of the judicial system, of I have to earn everything, even still in 12-step, I have to earn everything. You mentioned at the beginning that you get to a place where you really have a lot of freedom, a lot of
Mhm.
self-love. Take us on that journey a little bit. How did you make that transition? Because to me, that's by far the most interesting and meaningful
Mhm. Yeah.
of all of your external circumstances.
Yeah, it started pretty simply. So I had a very specific incident where I stand and it's called the C train. So it's a public transit with trains. Ours is above ground. I stand in on the platform like you should kill yourself. And I remember my therapist was getting me to do these things called breathing squares to help calm your system down, anxiety. And
Know it
I started,
well.
I started doing some of those. And then I made the agreement with myself, have a coffee. There's a little coffee shop. If you still want to do it when you're done your coffee, you can. And so it was just these small little changes of behavior, being open to that and really starting to honor like the people I surround myself with are really going to impact my perspective and the way I'm going to approach things and how I view myself. So unfortunately within 12-step communities, there's also very unhealthy groups and communities.
Everywhere there is,
Yeah,
right?
everywhere you go, there's good and bad. And I had some that weren't helping me get to that kind of freedom space, that self love. And I needed to move away from that. And that was difficult, especially when they were people who had supported me for a long time through some really hard moments.
Right. So
Mhm.
I mean, quite frankly, if most people that start in NA or AA are doing it because their life is about to end, right? They're
Mhm.
really in a situation where they're going to die if they don't make some
Yeah.
changes. So
Yeah.
that's really critical. And that saved you from that thing. But in 12 step, we also say focus on the one that's going to kill you first.
Mhm.
And obviously, if you're standing there sober 2 years later, looking at or maybe that made that up. I don't know. I somehow thought it was 2 years later, but maybe it's not.
2 years out of prison. So it would have
2 years.
been almost 10
Okay.
years sober at that
And you're
point.
sober and you're still getting to a place where you're thinking about ending your life, it's not the sobriety that needs to be addressed at that point.
Yeah.
It's whatever the thinking is that's getting you in
Yeah.
such a place that's so hopeless that you're thinking about ending
Mhm.
your life. So when that decision to take a coffee, was that just out of self-love? Was that just out of like, I'm going to do something that I really enjoy, sit down and take a coffee?
It was out of just tools, CBT tool sets from my therapist at that time.
Okay.
Was like, yeah, it's like, like even from the 12 steps, pause when agitated. I knew
Yeah.
I wasn't okay. I
Right.
knew that like real deep. And as much as I knew I didn't want to die, like I just felt so trapped again. Like I've
Mhm.
done all these actions, I've put all this work in. I got out of prison, like that was supposed to be the joy. Like I made
Right.
it through that process. So I earned the privilege. Like I never had a release date. I had to have good behavior and do
Right.
programs and all that. So I felt like I've done everything I should and I'm absolutely broken and shattered. And so that little beginning step, as well as getting into some communities that were going to help build me up and lift me up, men's work and men's mental health communities, especially, I'm a huge proponent of, and got mixed in with a group at that time. You had mentioned before, Vince was one who had pulled me into that. And that's where some of our deeper connections started to happen outside of just sports.
Was that MKP or some other?
No, it was just an internal group of guys that
Okay.
had started meeting,
Mankind
and
Project. Okay.
no specific framework. They called themselves the Kings. And
I have one that's called New Adam, which
yeah,
is loosely based on Mankind Project, but very good supportive
yeah.
community event. Yeah.
Yeah, and even that was just having people that would refer to me as a king. Like we'd use those statements and terms, and
Right.
just it was starting to walk away even from the 12-step community of I am. That's a very big thing, and I don't really agree with anymore of always framing myself as a brokenness.
Right.
That was even changing some of that and really hearing the challenge on it, because I was first introduced into the 12-step communities at 16, so very young. And so a
So
lot of
very
my yeah, so a lot of my understanding and framework and growth and development as a young man and then in my adulthood was really about all those narratives that come out of there. Like first and foremost, you're always broken and you're going to die if you fail. Like if you relapse. So like some really extreme ones, but they were deep. I went through a number of long-term treatment facilities that had some great aspects and had some absolutely toxic aspects to them.
sure.
So it was really battling that. So getting into there and then disconnecting from some of those communities really started to be that push. And I come back to that moment where I was talking to the other men around me from the rugby community and these men's groups and hearing the same internal struggles
Yeah.
gave me some great freedom to say, like, I'm not that far off. Even though I have these extreme content pieces, like some extreme failures and tragedies, and having caused absolute hardship and pain for a lot of people, I'm working through them in the same manner. I'm experiencing the same processes of success and failure and viewpoints of myself. So it gave me a lot of permission to say, you're here, you're in the game. I took a jump and went and did some schooling to start getting into the coaching world. And even that, just being there and present, coming from a very different background than a lot of these students. There's some VPs from some universities and some big titles.
Right.
Where
Right.
first day I walk in and I'm like, what am I doing here? I'm working
Got
at a
imposter
drug,
syndrome running
yeah,
hard.
working at the drug treatment center and working in HR and doing that stuff and getting in there and just seeing like I belong.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
starting some of that journey. There's still a lot of work. And I remember there's even a process on the last day of our first residency for the school where I got up and started talking and just about knowing I needed to leave that community. It had been the one community that always supported me no matter what, but it was also the thing that was causing me the greatest failing at that point, and just like broke down crying. And everyone was like, you're not allowed to do that at school. But I was safe at the same, same
If
time.
you're in coaching school, it seems like that ought to be allowed, you know?
Yeah. So it was great. It was just very freeing. And that really started to begin like, you're here, you belong, you're valid. Your journey might be different, but the way you experience it is the same as everyone else. And just having fellow students come up and just be respectful of what I'd shared and the emotion. And it was this, okay, now it's time to make the movement and to start acting as if. So as if I was healed, as if I had that self-love, as if I felt like I belonged, even
What
though I still had a lot of that imposter syndrome. It was,
for
let's
sure.
let go of that fear that held me back.
What were some of those actions that you did when you were acting as if?
Being willing to start coaching, to get out there, that was just one of those first steps. It's I kind of look back and I'll chuckle, but at the time I was absolutely terrified to say, well, why would anyone want to hear anything from me? Because
Right.
that's why I'm not good enough. And
Right.
having the people come and say, like, hey, like, yeah, you've had hardship, you've caused some great pain, but that's also a lot of where your strength comes from in supporting others. Like, there's no one that can sit across from me and share a piece of their pain where I could ever look at them and say, you've lost your humanity, just because I know how far down I had to go and come back from. So like that's
Right.
like one big piece I'm always going to have is there's never a piece of adversity a business owner can come and say, like, I don't know how I survived this. Like it's
Right.
just it'll take too long. It's too insurmountable. Sorry. There's too many things I'd have to do. And I just sit from a place of confidence knowing like, well, no, I know you can do that.
Right.
Like look at
Right.
I know the journey I've walked, and it's not always about relating that to them, but just having an absolute confidence of like, yeah, like start making choices today. And that
Right.
really became that narrative for me is like the choice I'm going to make today will create my tomorrow.
Right.
So what can I
Right.
change today? And that was that live as if, was just putting myself out there, being open to podcasts and things like this when they come across my plate, just being like, yeah, like I'll step into that. I don't live in that fear and don't hide away and engage with people, learning how to even share the fact that I'd taken a life. I used to always struggle so hard
Sure.
and just felt like I wanted to give credence to it and integrity, and it just always felt so heavy, and I felt like I had to share so much of it versus just now being able to say, like, yes, I have taken a life, it was my responsibility, my failures, and I continue to live that responsibility, and then being able to leave it there and being open if someone's like, hey, can we have more discussion? Absolutely. But I
Right.
used to always feel like I had to drop this heavy emotional, like, let me tell you how and why.
Right. Right. And that's also in a way of responding to I'm not good enough because I have to justify, I have to say it wasn't as bad as
Yeah.
you think or whatever the
Yeah.
situation. And to be able to let it sit
Mhm.
on the table is a place coming from a place of understanding that you are valuable, you are worthy, you
Uh,
do have worth, right? And that's a very different place to get to. Where do you think your life would be, Andy, now if you hadn't made that shift, the mindset shift from I'm not good enough to there's something worthwhile in here?
One of two options. I would have been successful in ending my life by now, or I would have been living very small and very manipulated. And when I say manipulated, just by those around me who are going to ask for my service, who I would never feel like I had the ability to say no, whether I wanted to be there or not.
Right.
So it'd be kind of in that frame. I don't know what the content of life would be, but it would be a lot of self hate, a lot of responding out of fear and out of shame and guilt, instead of out of a place of just love and compassion, empathy, and confidence of being able to go for the things that align with my life now and where I want to go and spend my energies and that. So even in that kind of coming to that spot of love was the ability to say no,
Yeah.
to close off things, to exit communities and relationships that didn't serve and didn't align with who I wanted to be anymore.
Say more about that because I think it's really important because you said that really quickly. You said coming to a place out of love was the ability to say no. So
Yeah,
love for who?
both parties, myself and the other.
And the other.
So it's the
Right.
love for self of like do the things that are gonna, yeah, matter to you and align with you and where
Right.
you want to put your energy. Like we're a finite resource.
Yes.
And just also, yeah, like life is very fragile. I know that from the other angle. And it's
Yep.
part of honoring that amend, to use the 12-step community,
Yep.
was to not live falsely, to live a good and valued life. And then that love for the other person is, if I resent what I'm giving you, how is that helping you? Like, sure, it might get the content done or it might get that
Yeah.
task, but
Yeah.
ultimately, that's not the people who should be in your life either. Like,
Yeah.
you should be having communities and workmates or whatever you're engaging with, of people that want to be there, want to be engaged with you.
Absolutely. And
And
I think
sometimes even that's how the other person learns. Like sometimes I've had to learn those hard lessons from another of saying no. Giving them that no might open them up to see, like, hey, like, how did I approach this person? Was
yeah.
I fair to them? Was I open? Because I know in some of those moments where people sought me out, if they wanted to go back and really look at it, they weren't coming from a place of love. It was a place of advantage. They knew they could get what they needed out of me.
Right. This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Transition Mastery Coaching. If you have made it to midlife and you're successful and you are going through transitions in your life, in your business, in your career, or in your organization, and you are looking to master those transitions, to make the most of them, to accelerate into the next phase of your organization or your life. If you're facing challenges in your business, challenges in your relationship, challenges in your health, and you really want to transition those quickly, I'm here to guide you for that. And I look forward to working with you. And you can sign up for either Pinnacle Transition Coaching or Summit. Please go to lifeintransition.online/MLTM and scroll to see the Summit and Pinnacle Coaching, or reach out to me directly on my email, art@artblanchford.com. And I look forward to connecting with you and helping you to accelerate your transitions to achieve what it is that you want to achieve in the second half in your organization and in your life, so you can live your whole life with no regrets. But I think that's such an important point. I mean, to say, first of all, that you do it for yourself, but also it's love for the other person, because something done out of obligation is not a gift. It's not service. And it's easy to think that. And a lot of people do it, especially women. Quite frankly, they're built a little bit more nurturing and caring for others, and they'll often spend themselves at the expense of others to help others. I have that conversation with my wife a lot too. I'll ask her to do something, and then she'll say, okay. And I'll say, wait. No, I don't want you to do it if you're going to feel like that about it. Oh, no, it's fine. I'll do it.
Mhm.
But it's not okay with me because I don't want to build that resentment. And sometimes she'll even say, well, then you even have a higher standard. You want me to be happy to do it. And I'm like, no, I do. Either accepting or happy, or don't do it. It's fine. I don't need you
Yeah.
to do it. Right. And I don't want to build resentment. So that's really important. I love that it's both the love for you and the love for other. That's really important. How has this shift, and you've talked about some of this from like mentors and 12 step and so forth, but how has this shift in your mindset to starting to love yourself? How has it affected those closest to you? Like if you look at your relationships, it's family or spouses or children, how has it affected those relationships that are most important to you?
I think the biggest piece is I only put the energy into those close ones that I actually want to have. So
Mhm.
one of the relationships I ended was probably the closest person I had in my life. And that was a mentor of like 20 plus years.
Wow.
So
Congratulations for having the courage, the insight, and the courage to do
yeah,
that.
yeah, and that was a very difficult one. There's so much that I was provided by him that I am grateful for.
For sure.
But that was the tough piece, was also knowing, but it's time to go. So that was that first step of really only putting the energy into the ones that I wanted to be a part of and truly wanted me to be a part of at the
Mhm.
level that I was comfortable and safe. I definitely believe my relationships with my family are much richer and just they're gentler. There used to always be a lot of control conflict and a lot of struggle and strife. And even with them, I felt that they supported me through everything, through addiction as a teenager and relapse and then prison and just all these things where it's like, well, I have to be the extra good son, the extra good brother, and anywhere I could help and just disconnecting from that narrative as well. I'm just coming from that place of love of like, let's engage as equals and we want to be family and spend time together. Having a daughter who's now 3 has been an absolute blessing for just, she does not understand anything about my past. She
Mm.
only understands me as I've shown up in her life for the 3 years. And it's absolutely amazing. You just, the smiles, the giggles, and even in the tantrums when she's safe to have her tantrum in my arms and cry. That has taught me as much about where I am now and how I let go of all of that past, just to be that person that is today and present and coming from love. As this little child feels safe to be breaking down in my arms and not need me away and not being like, I can't get that from him. Like to
Mm.
her in that moment, I'm everything she needs. And
Mm.
that's been an amazing lesson in that of just reminding me of like, it's the actions of the people around you that care that have truly shown me that, yeah, I am a person of love and I'm a good man. I'm valid and I'm worthy and I'm here. So I would definitely say they're much richer for it. It also becomes much more evident when I fall back into those old patterns. When I start operating from the I'm not good enough, so I have to prove. And
How does it show up? It's more evident in what way?
I start to become very silent. I used to always put the smile on and swallow everything.
Mm.
So when I start to do a lot of that of like, yeah, sure, okay, yep,
Mm.
yeah, well, yeah, that's great. But then that feeling of resentment, and then it definitely comes out in the behaviors to them because I'm, for lack of a better term, I'm slightly pissy.
Right.
Is probably the best way to describe it. Like, sure, I'm doing what they had asked for, what they want, but it's that resentment kind of coming through. It's the passive aggressive that comes out and that harms it. So, but it's also I'm seeing it quicker, coming back to repairing that as well a lot quicker.
But that's what
Uh,
you're seeing on your own, or are they holding up a reflection? Are they also saying, hey, what's going on? You're not your normal self.
Both. Yeah.
Both.
Like there's moments where I can see it because as we practice the skills and we go through these things, it comes out quicker. But also just having those right people around me that are saying, like, this isn't good enough. This isn't who you should be and how you should operate. But then also giving me the space to make those mistakes and then come back and not be cast off because of them. I
Mhm.
have that space to be around and be present and just accepting their love a lot more gently myself as well. Whereas before that narrative would have heard like, you suck, you're worthless, you need to be better, do better for their love and their acceptance. Whereas now it's just, hey, that was the lesson. Let go
Mhm.
of it, move forward.
And do you feel at this point, Andy, do you feel that you're still your personal self-worth and lovability is based on somebody else's love for you? Or do you feel like you have that innately in yourself now?
It's innately in myself now. There's small moments where the dark days where you can get back in that old thinking, but just the way I approach things, even just friendships and work opportunities, clients, it's really coming from that spot of I love myself and I'm valid and I'm here and I'm going to keep trying.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
When did you first notice that shift from being, even of self-worth being like externally triggered or externally
Mhm.
validated to I'm just enough as I am with me alone without anybody else's opinion of anything,
Yeah.
just being okay, just by being a child of God or being a human being or however you want to say it.
Yeah. I think the first like hits of it was really 5 years ago, kind of stepping out into the coaching world. That was a big piece of saying, like, you're good, Andy. That was that first action until I kind of really truly started to believe it. And every couple of years, I seem to have a bit of life that often will kick me in between the eyes. And you got to take a look at it and you go internal. And it's like, no, like I'm a good man. I'm
Mm.
coming from the right spot. I don't have to struggle so hard to have people want to love me or want me to be around. And that's often where I've had those moments the last couple of years is I'm not feeling great. I'm feeling disconnected in a relationship often. And I look at that and it's like, oh, I was coming back from that old framework of like, can I be of enough value? So I've had
Can it be worthwhile for someone to be in relationship with
yeah,
me
yeah.
instead of owning that that's who you are?
Yeah. So, and then really, I'd say about 2 years ago now, really around being a father and stepping into that, having struggles with that, having my own narratives of can I be a good enough dad? How is she going to handle my past? And just realizing like none of that will matter if I just show up. Like,
Yeah, if you continue to show up and drop into her world and love her unconditionally, even when it's really tough, you
like
know?
there'll be some hard conversations down the road as she gets older,
Sure.
and I'm quite comfortable to have that. But it's still going to be based out of being her dad, out of that space of love, and that
Right.
was just that lesson of like take that into everything.
Yeah.
There's not a single thing you can't walk into and face and not be okay. And that was that even coming through everything like prison and just that journey of just knowing like if I choose to surrender. And that's really a big piece of it is that surrender of like if I let go of all that, if I surrender, I can be okay. I can move forward. I can keep making choices today to get better and better and better. But now that choice is always framed in I belong.
Yeah.
I'm loved. I'm a good man. And let's go. So just taking the risks and just they might work out, they might not. That's okay.
No, that's awesome that you have that inherently in you. What does it mean to you when you say just to surrender? What does it mean?
A big piece of it is around the narratives. I've always just had that narrative that will roll into my head of you like you should, you could. There's expectations on behavior and appearance and decorum and just all of those things that have always just been very strong in my mind. So that's where a big piece of that surrender comes from of let it go. Don't listen to the voices. I have a big spiritual piece and belief in God as well, where it's kind of surrender into that universal connection. I
Mhm.
think that's the best way it's felt of like, I'm a part of this greater community, good and bad for all of us.
Yep.
Do the best I can.
Yeah.
Like all I have is today. Even after this call, like get off, like surrender. What can I do for the rest of my day? How can I be a
Right.
good man? How can I serve my community and kind of that universal connection in the way that I'm comfortable and I want to be engaged? So
Right.
some of that giving back, the volunteering, the connecting with other men, like I said, still a big proponent in men's work in groups and still involved in those and running one now and just because I want to, not because I
Right.
have to be alive and to not relapse. Like, hey, if you don't
Right.
give back enough, you're going to end up doing drugs again. But wanting to give back because, hey, I want other men to come from this space. A lot of us don't even think about, hey, can I operate from a place of love?
Yeah.
That's like foreign language to a lot of men.
Yeah.
It's always coming from those relationships of, well, I have to be a good enough earner for a woman to want me.
Yeah.
I have to provide for my family, my kids, and just my workmates. Like, what's my work title? That's who I am. It's
Right.
like, I just love the freedom for me that's come from it and wanting to share that
Yeah.
with other guys.
Now that's
So,
beautiful. In WA, one of the affirmations is there's nothing I have to do and nowhere I have to go. And as I was unwinding from my identity as my title, as my
yeah,
position and power and all this stuff, right? That was such a good thing to remind me. Like I used to stress, I thought I had to be in every meeting on every continent and every day because that's what I have to do. And just to remind myself, there's nothing actually that I have to do.
yeah.
Right. And there's nowhere I have to go. And that brings me to a place of surrender and okay, I can be in this moment without being confused by all the other moments that may or may not ever happen or may not have happened the way I remember if I'm thinking about the past. So no, that's beautiful. And I'm curious, Andy, if you were to give one tool, and I really usually leave this pretty open, but I really want to focus on that, like one tool that other listeners can, or our listeners can use to move themselves toward that place of self-love where they understand, hey, I'm a good person. I'm worthy of love. I'm lovable. I am love. I can come from a loving space. Everything I do can start from that position. What would that tool be? Like something that's actionable that people can take and use, right as they hit pause or stop listening to this podcast.
Yeah. One that landed for me from studying I was doing and a friend was the idea of how can I make this moment sacred? And it's kind of a stop check inventory of whatever I'm going through, just pause, take that breath and think about how can I make this moment sacred and in whatever context that works for you. I know we all have different backgrounds, faiths, spiritual angles and just views, but how does this align with your deeper being, your deeper kind of core and belonging and purpose? And how can you just slow down and really honor what it is and see how it fits like and where you're going. So for example, in this podcast, it's clearing my space. It's taking 10 minutes before we even got on today. Just calming down, taking a breath. And it's like, okay, what's going to be amazing about this moment? How can I bring into it and what can I take from it? And how might this impact my world? And just really taking a conscious moment to stop. And I just use that phrase of like, how can I make this sacred? How can I make it matter? And it might not be the most amazing thing. Like you can cleaning the house. How can I make cleaning the house sacred? Connect it to, well, this is where I live.
Yeah.
Why do I not want to treat where I live better? And so it's a bit of that framework, and into some of the heavier pieces, I'll use that relationship with my mentor of like, how can I make this sacred? It's letting go of it because it's not serving either of us.
Right. Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
So
I love that question. I love that question. That's really, I mean, I've used beautiful a lot in this conversation. I don't usually use it that much, but it is. I mean, I think that brings me centered. It brings me to now, right? Instead of to somewhere else, and how to make this sacred. And if I'm upset at somebody, that's definitely not a sacred space. So how can I make this sacred? Well, okay, take a breath. And like you said, there's a reason, and everything can be sacred. You said cleaning the house, doing the dishes, whatever, all of it can be sacred, right?
Even if you're angry at someone, you need to have a difficult conversation. Thinking about it in that sacred frame gives me the ability of what's important in this conversation.
Right.
How do I convey what I'm experiencing, feeling? But how do I also honor what that person needs out of this?
Yeah.
Can really pull me back instead of, I'm just going to attack. I'm going to tell them what they did wrong and really going in on that, pulling it back of like, what do we both need out of this?
Right.
Do I need to be heard? How might they need to be heard? What are they going through? Am I honoring their heart coming into this conversation? Which is possibly a weird framework for a lot of people in the work setting, when maybe you got to bring in an underling that you have to have a hard conversation because their work isn't good. Slow yourself down. And how am I honoring what they're coming in with?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's going to condone any behaviors or any choices.
No, not at all.
It's really allowing both humans to show up in that. So that's also what I really love about it. It's really takes it down to that thing that's been such a difficult piece for me, is to love myself. It always makes me also look, and how do I love everyone else involved in this? Because when I also offer that to them, it becomes very difficult to not offer it to myself. Kind of tricks myself and pulls me into it as well.
Right. No, I think that's great. And I call those courageous conversations, right? And you have to have the courageous conversation, especially in work, and especially if you're the leader in the situation. You have to create the space where they can also say what's on their mind, and you can see them. If you go back to now it's an old book from Stephen Covey, right? The Habit 5, seek first to understand, but then to be understood, to love yourself also, not just to understand, but then to be understood, but to really have that conversation. And then whatever you have to say, if something needs to be corrected, can land. Before that, it can't land, and it won't do any good anyway. So no, that's great. I love that tool. How can I make this moment sacred? It's a great question, one I'm going to use a lot going forward. So thank you for that. Last question, Andy. Where can people find out more about you? If they want to connect with you, where can they do that?
2 avenues are LinkedIn, and then at my website, andyevans.ca.
Awesome.
I'm a Canadian, so it's the .ca, not the .com. But
yeah, sure. Yeah.
There's no long distance charges on that. So.
Well, Andy, I really appreciate you being with us today. I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate your authenticity, and I appreciate your wisdom as well.
It's been great. Thank you for having me. I really appreciated this.
I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.